And it's being brought to you today, once again, by the Corn Marketing Program here in Michigan. I'm Terry Henney. Along with me is the Executive Director of the Corn Marketing Program of Michigan, Jim Zook. Jim, good morning. How are you this morning?
Well, good morning, Terry. And fortunately, where we're at, south of Lansing, we don't have the ice like you've got up there in your area.
Yeah, it's kind of icy all around the state. Looks like a little more wintry-like. Now, some folks really want some winter. Unfortunately, they haven't been satisfied yet. But again, I think we've got a little bit more winter yet to go, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. But, you know, as I always tell my wife, it's kind of like we've got one more day that we're closer to spring with this weather. So I'll definitely take it. It's been a very mild winter, but, you know, last year was that way as well.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, on the radio program yesterday, I mentioned the fact that on January the 11th of a year ago, up here in the Great Lakes Bay region, we received 1 3/4 inches of rain. And temperatures were 48 degrees, and we had winds close to 50 miles per hour. So what a difference a year makes. But I think this is a much better year, and I'm hoping it's going to be a much better year for everyone, including, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Each week, we do have a range of experts from all across the agricultural industry that join us and talk about some of the more timely topics and issues affecting the industry. Now, a couple of things. First of all, this webinar is being simultaneously broadcast on the Michigan Corn Facebook, as well as the other Facebooks that I mentioned to you before, our Farm Service Facebook, WSGW Facebook, the 94.5 The Moose Facebook, and of course on the website, the corn website, micorn.org. And here you're watching us on Zoom. Many of you are. And that's really important because if you're on the Zoom format, you will be able to register for those CCA and CEU credits that you will need. So again, if you're on the Zoom, we can verify your attendance. If if you want to register online, you can by going to www.micorn.org/events. Now, we're going to make some time a little bit later on to answer some questions that you might have. Jim's going to assist us with that. We're going to be listening shortly here with Lou DeGrant. Lou is going to be talking about a lot of things that many of you are really interested in right now. So as you get these questions that you want to talk to Lou about, all you've got to do is on the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. Just put your cursor down on there, your little arrow, click on that, a box will come up and you can type your question in there. Jim will be looking at those questions, and as we go through with Lou and eventually with Caleb, then we'll have a chance to ask them those questions. So again, keep the questions coming through the presentation, and we'll try to field as many of them as we possibly can. So at this time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to, oh yes, for the Facebook folks, you should all know that you do have a comment section there on Facebook, and Jim will be monitoring those questions as well. Now, I'd like to introduce, first of all, our speaker for the day, Lou DeGrant. Lou's with the Cooperative Elevator Company. So without further ado, Lou, the stage is all yours. Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, everybody. How are you guys doing today? First off, I guess I'll just try to share my screen here, see if we can do that. Can you guys see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Looks good, Lou.
All right. This is, so anyways, as Terry was saying, my name is Lou DeGrant. I'm at the Cooperative Elevator Company. I'm here at our office in Pigeon. I've been working from home, but I was having some technical difficulties, so I just came in here this morning. Just a little bit about me. After high school, I spent 6 years in the Navy, got to see and do a bunch of cool things. And then I graduated from the prestigious Baker College in Flint. I have a degree in business management. And I sold insurance for a long time, and now I've been here at the co-op about 12 years. So I always tell folks, you know, I did not grow up in agriculture. This is a weird business where almost everybody involved grew up in it. Grandma and grandpa were involved, or mom and dad. You know, and I just ended up here by plain dumb luck, and consider that a real blessing. So I'm really fortunate to be here and work with and for all you guys and ladies, and I'm excited. So I will go through this, some of my stuff. The disclaimer, if you don't take anything away from this, take this disclaimer away. This disclaimer basically says that I do not know what I'm talking about. There certainly, you know, a report like today is really hard to call. We're going to talk about that in a while. And I think we give a good picture, but I certainly do not know the future. I do not know what's going to happen today. So today we are going to talk about the quarterly stocks report and the monthly supply and demand report that we're going to get here in a few hours. That will basically summarize 2020 production and the grain stocks as of December 1st. So, and Jim and I were talking about this a little bit early this morning. You know, sometimes growers think that these reports are fake or manipulated. I hear guys say this all the time. You know, these reports are only as good as the data that farmers provide them, that elevators provide them. And I know that you all love getting these USDA surveys and answering them accurately. But when we do answer them accurately, we get a better picture. You know, the other thing I would say about these USDA reports is whether we believe them or not, and we're certainly going to get into that here, whether we believe them or not, they are what the market sees. They are the numbers that the market uses. They're the numbers that traders use. And even if we don't believe them when we're out in the field, they're functionally true. We have to treat them like that. You know, I would also say here, the USDA is primarily staffed by career people. Most of the people there are not political appointees. Most of the people are there long-term. You know, I've met and dealt with some of these people. They're good folks. They want to do a good job. You know, the other thing I would say is they have to wait for data. They actually have to see things develop, see things play out. They cannot fill in these blanks with hunches or rumors. You know, I deal with farmers. It seems the one thing you all have in common is you all have a cousin who drove to Iowa in the first week of August to look at this new corn header he was going to get, or this corn head. And then he saw in Iowa all the fields were burned up and there's no corn there. And then, you know, the rest of Iowa was flooded out and there's no corn. And the USDA has to actually report not what your cousin saw on his road trip through Iowa, but what they actually see on the ground. So I do have some thoughts on today's report that we're going to kind of close with. But today, what I'm going to try to do is look forward at today's report by looking backwards at last year's reports. So when we look backwards, you know, 2020, obviously a challenging year for everybody. 2020 started out good for me. I lost 50 pounds, kept it off. I was very excited. And then 2 weeks before Christmas, I found out I needed bifocals. So Christmas 2020 ended up kind of a wash for me. But I wanted to do this with minimal political talk, which we're going to try to stay out of today, and minimal COVID-19 talk. Certainly we have to mention those a few times, but try to stay away from it. And then the last point I want to make here is no one in the grain business wants to make a prediction on any report on a report day, let alone one as, you know, potentially explosive as today. I mean, today we're going to get a big report. There's going to be a ton of news come out today at noon, or there should be. And no one wants to make a prediction on that. And then I would say that includes me. I do not want to make a prediction on today's report. When Michigan Corn asked me to do this and asked me to talk about reports, I said, yeah, I would love to do that. You know, when do you want to do it? And they said, well, January 12th. And I said, well, that's a report day. Let's do it the day before or the day after. And they said, no, we want to do it on that day, which is fine, but it's really hard, you know, to take a guess on what's going to happen when there should be so much big news today. So what we're going to do. Okay. This is a monthly corn chart that I printed up. This is 25 years worth of corn chart. Can you guys see my mouse pointer on the screen? No? Okay. So this is 25 years worth of corn chart. This goes back to January 1976. This very last line on your right-hand side is just this week. I put in some lines here I wanted to talk about. You know, everybody talks about $4 corn. This yellow line, or I think it's yellow, I'm colorblind. This line I just put in is $4. So in the last 25 years, this is how little time we've spent over $4 futures. There's a brief hit here in 1995 or so, that's before my time. There's this first big spike is when Jim and his friends basically set up an ethanol industry, jumped that thing up. You can see where it settles down in 2009 and 10. That's kind of the new average after ethanol. And then obviously in 2011, 12, and 13, we have this massive spike on this unprecedented weather event we have. I put in some other lines. This one's $5. This is about where we are right now. So if we look over 25 years, that spike to the far left in 1995, it's about 3 months that we spent above $5 futures. The big spike that we call this ethanol spike, it's about 10 months over that. In 2011, 12, 13, there's about 35 months over this. I tried to count them all yesterday, all those little lines. $6 futures, even smaller. Everybody in 2012, when corn got so expensive, everybody wants to, $7 corn, right? It spent such little time there. Here's $7. Again, it's 2 months over it in 2008, and just about 10, 12 months over it in 2011, 12. So the standards that guys have in their heads for $6 and $7 corn have been very few and far between here in the last 25 years. And I suspect that without something dramatic, it probably stays that way. So we're going to go back to about a year ago today. We got a January stocks report. Just talk about what these reports are. What we're going to do is try to go back and see maybe some of the patterns we missed last year and see if we can't see them a little better this year, see some of the trends that were happening, how they developed, some of the questions over the year. January 10th report, supply-wise, the USDA raised yield from 167 to 168. They lowered harvested acres. Now, remember, 2019 harvest was an absolute mess. It was wet in most of the country. It was super wet here. There was still a lot of corn out this time of year. The USDA in this report gave us a note that said that they were going to probably revise that harvested acres somewhere down the road. I don't think we'll see that today. We had a pretty good harvest weather across the country. I think everything probably got done. But as a result of this, production has increased about 30 million bushels. On the demand side, they increased feed and residual. They lowered exports a little bit. They did not change ethanol. There's a line in there on the demand side for food, seed, and industrial use. They lowered it a little bit. I don't really talk about that food, seed, and industrial. It stays pretty constant through the year. Feed exports and ethanol are the big ones that move, so we'll kind of focus on those. Stocks last year at this time, 11.39 billion bushels, which is a little less than the trade estimate going into that. And the carryout is at 1.89 billion bushels, a little over the trade estimate. We have a crop that's getting a little bit bigger in January. Not a very friendly report. We get that this crop's getting bigger, and there's still a lot of corn in the field. Probably some questions about how that corn was, but it was eventually going to come into the market, come out of the fields. So overall, a pretty bearish report. It really sets the tone for the beginning of 2020. So a month later, we're going to get the February report, right? So here's the deal with February and March. February, they don't change feed. They change exports and ethanol a little, but those two numbers offset each other for a net zero. They do not carry or change carryout at all. They basically punt an entire report in February. They just go, hey, we don't have anything to tell you. We'll tell you some more in March. Then in March, they do the exact same thing. They don't change any of these numbers. They do not change the carryout. So basically, we get bad news in January, And in February, March, we just go, yeah, there's no news. So we're still trading off this January news for quite a long while here. Here's those reports. I clipped them out. This is the carryout number down on the bottom that I circled. You can see those demand numbers just above that circle. No changes. So I don't know if they just took a long winter break here or what, but nothing going on. So we get to a March 31st. So these quarterly stocks reports we're going to get today, most of you probably know, we get a quarterly, which they measure what's actually in the bins. We got those the end of March, end of June, end of September. This one we should have got the end of December, but because of the holiday, we always kick it back here to about the 10th or 12th of January. That March report, the big number we're going to look for in March is this planted, this acres report. They estimated we would plant about 97 million acres of corn, which was really surprising. But when you think about it, 2019, a lot of corn didn't get planted through the country. There were definitely some concerns. You know, those guys in the corn states, they like growing corn. They're set up to grow corn. They have the equipment and the dryers and ethanol plants on every corner. They like doing it. And we really thought that last year that they would do it, that they would get out and plant wall-to-wall corn because they like it. We were up from about 90 million acres in 2019. The average trade crest was 94 million acres. So this acres thing really caught people by surprise. This is one of the quick times we'll talk about COVID. When that March 31st stock report comes in, we're about 2 weeks into national restrictions or lockdowns or working from home or whatever we call it. And there was definitely already some talk at this point about the ethanol industry slowing down because people weren't going places. I was working from home. Almost everybody I know that could work from home across the country, almost everybody I know that could work from home at that point was working from home. So, you know, I put gas in my car the middle of March, and I don't think I put gas in it again until May. I just didn't go anywhere, didn't do anything. The ending stocks at that point, they give us an ending stocks number with these, is just shy of 8 billion bushels. Trade guess was just over 8 billion. So it was kind of came in even, but definitely we'll watch this number because it kind of gets smaller as the year goes on here. April and May reports, I kind of condensed these for a while. In April, feed is up, exports don't change. And here we see that ethanol concern come to fruition. They lower ethanol, corn use for ethanol by 375 million. That increases carryout 200 million, puts us over a 2 billion bushel carryout. It's a lot of corn. And this ethanol thing looks like it's going to be around for a while. So definitely some concern. This is another, and I have another chart that'll lay some of these out here in a minute. This is another bearish report going in. So right now we think we're going to plant a lot of acres. We're really concerned about ethanol. The market's just kind of piling on the bad news. May, USDA comes out, they increase feed, 350 million. They increase ethanol. They bounce the ethanol right back. 250 million, they bounce exports up. So cheap corn, weakening US dollar at that time, folks were out buying corn. The ethanol, they're projecting a bounce back after we're all back to work. I think by the time that May report came out, everybody thought this thing would be over June 1st. And we thought we'd be traveling all over the country. Carryout is now up 1.2 billion. I'll show you on the next screen. This is when they start projecting the end of the next marketing year. So it has a big impact on carryout on this report. The 2020 crop, the crop we're planting last year, is now 67% planted. On 97 million acres, which is still what we think we're planting here, on that yield, they think we're going to produce 16 billion bushels of corn. You know, the demand on this report was really friendly, but the supply is getting big. I mean, it's a problem here. This carryout's getting bigger. If we look here on these charts, the bottom right-hand corner has the price. That's like the price estimated to farmers. So in April, they think maybe farmers will get 360. And in May, after they pile on this big production number, they think it'll be down to 320. So these reports are definitely not friendly I skipped the June supply and demand report. We'll skip ahead to June stock. So this is the now end of June. This is on June 30th. The USDA now estimates that 92 million acres of corn had been planted. So in June, they jump us right at the beginning of July, essentially. They take us from 97 million acres to 92. This is the largest March-June decline in 40 years. Guys didn't plant it, whether it was, weather in some places or just things had changed or guys decided to grow soybeans, whatever it was, a huge reduction in acres. This was the first good news we started to get last year. This results in 500 million bushels less of carryout, but we're still projected to be the second largest crop ever. At this time, they had yield at 178. The ending stocks are 5.2 billion bushels. Trade guess is just under 5. Last year was at 5.2. So we're kind of right in trend with where we normally are. So this is where things start to get a little more interesting. The July supply and demand report. So if we go back to this, on this June report, they say we lost 5 million acres that didn't get planted. So in the July report, they have to tell us, hey, those acres that didn't get planted, we're also not going to be harvesting them. So these are definitely some things to watch for in this year's reports. Just because they put this big acreage report out, are these acres really going to get planted? I didn't introduce crop conditions into this. It just became bogged down with data, but definitely watching crop conditions too as the summer goes on, planting progress, how things look out there. But here's where, that June report, we start to get some good news, and here we start to see it come to fruition. Feed down 200 million. Remember, we were starting to worry about feed, if they were going to have to call animal herds and, what was going to happen with all the grocery shopping and all the craziness going on. Exports of ethanol, they do not change. We take a giant cut to carry out. 675 million gets us down to 2.6 billion. They still have a really high yield. In July, I think most people felt like this yield was too high. That 178 was too optimistic. This is also interesting. This is basically the time when the president says, people ask him about phase 2 of this trade deal. The president says, I'm not really concerned about it. I'm not focused on it. I don't know if it's going to happen. I guess it never really did happen. And then July 14th, China goes ahead and they make their largest purchase of U.S. corn ever. 2 weeks later, they break that record. So while the president's saying we don't really care about this trade deal, China comes in and buys a bunch of corn. So this June and July report is when things really begin to kind of turn around. If you look at that bottom right-hand corner again, you'll see now they took the price from 320 to 335. Demand's still strong. Production getting a little smaller. Go to this August report. This August report really caught a lot of people. I think we all expected yield to get smaller. Everybody was pretty flabbergasted when yield actually got bigger. They adjusted yield from 178.5 to just a little shy of 182. It increased carryout just a little bit. They really didn't mess with demand very much. A little bit of feed, a little bit of exports. This export number, obviously there were some questions on. We'd heard China just made their 2 largest purchases, and then they didn't really change exports. We don't export a lot of corn to China on a normal year. So when we made these 2 big sales, they probably should have raised some more flags here. I think eventually they come into these reports, but they were a little slow to get there last year. So this is on that August report again. That yield, if you look at that bottom corner, that's kind of the bottom line price to the farmers. We went from 335 to 310. This August report was pretty shockingly bearish here. I would tell guys like we did at the beginning a little bit, the USDA only as good as that data that they get. If you get these surveys, fill them out. I know nobody likes doing it. Fill them out as accurately as you can. I think that is, helpful. I don't know what they saw that made that yield go up like that, but clearly it was something. We go to the September supply and demand. They decrease rather, feed a little. They increase exports. So maybe this is them starting to bring some of that Chinese export stuff in. They dock ethanol down again. They now go back to their July yield number. So they were up 3.3 in August, and then they just go back to the July number in September. They lower projected harvested acres based on that series of storms that came through Iowa, lost some acres, left us a note at that time and said, hey, we actually may have to dock more acres out of this. We're going to take 500,000 out. We think we actually may have lost more. Carry out gets cut from August. In August, we were at about 2.7 billion. We get to 2.5. Market would like to see us at 1. At 1 billion bushels, we're pretty bullish. So we're at double where we'd like to see. The September report was bullish. It jumps that corn price down on the bottom up to 350. It takes our carry out to use ratio 18. That's a line right above that 350. Things are turning. We get to a September stocks report. This is one of the big ones. Brings our ending stocks to just under 2 billion bushels. Trade guess was 2.2 billion bushels. So these are some of the really big questions, these next two lines on the USDA for last year. On-farm stocks. So this is where farmers are actually filling out surveys. This is the corn in my bins. Down 8% from 2019. Elevator stocks, end user stocks, down 12% from a year. You know, I talked to a bunch of people as I was putting this together and said, where did that corn go? Where did that corn end up? And I never really got a good answer. You know, I think there's some question if the corn just wasn't there from 2019. There's some question if maybe the surveys had not been correct going into it. You know, if maybe that corn got exported, but there's not a real good answer on where this corn does. The USDA certainly over the years has had their share of mysteries, you know, so this kind of leads into that. Are the reports true? There was a time maybe 8 years ago where they would shift this carry out by 250, 400 million bushels, like every stocks report. It would just, they'd add 250 for no reason. Then the next one, they'd subtract 450 for no reason. And they'd add 300. You know, this kind of felt like that. But I think there were so many questions out of the 2019 corn that it's really hard to put a finger on why this happened. They also reveal or increased yield for 2019 corn, about 0.1 bushel. That September report is kind of the last time to adjust the previous year's report. That added about 3 million bushels of corn to production for 2019. They also adjusted corn for silage up 715,000 tons. So all of a sudden in September, they said last year we underestimated the silage. Now, how they pulled this out in September, if this has something to do with those stocks that are missing a couple lines above where we're talking, I don't know. This is another question I've talked to a couple people about this week. No one has a really good answer for that, you know, why in September, 10 months after harvest, they just plug in all this silage corn. We get to the October report. So here at the end of the year, I hit all the reports so we can kind of see the trends going into today's report. And we can talk about it a little more. They adjust feed down. They don't change exports. This is a time when we're all talking about China's buying corn. The dollar was weak. You were talking about South America's having problems. Europe's having problems. It seems like exports should be cranking along, and they just don't do anything with it. Ethanol down a little bit. They decrease yield ever so slightly to 178.4. They lower planted and harvested acres, 1 million each. So out of our 92 million acres we're going to plant, now it's 91 million acres, just out of the blue in October. That other report, what we got in June, were lower in acres, 5 million, but they didn't report the harvested difference until July. Here they just catch it all at one time. Planted and harvested, down 1 million apiece. Carryout is cut again from September down to 2.1 billion. We're getting closer. Like we're starting to get good news here. We get here, that bottom line price, 360 to farmers, so getting a little better. Carry out to use now under 15%. So we're definitely trending in the right direction at this point. We get to November. Here's where things really start. Feed down 75 million. Exports, a huge jump, up 325 million bushels, now projected at 2.65. That's a record. Ethanol not changed. USDA decreases the yield. Now they get to 175. So we were at 178.4 and now we're at 175.8. They do not change production or projected harvest acres. They leave that alone here. They cut carryout down to 1.7. This is pretty key. We're back to carryout that's the lowest since 2013-14. Market sees this as pretty bullish. We're pretty excited about this November report. Global production, I didn't hit global production a lot in this. I didn't want to get too bogged down. Global production was lowered. China imports forecast to be 26 million metric ton, a record. So on this page, I use record twice. US exports at a record, China imports as a record. Probably not coincidence. I have another chart in a few minutes we'll look at that you can see how dramatic this change of US corn to China has been this year. This November report, you see down in that bottom corner, that's like I said, the bottom line for farmers. We bring price on the farm to $4. We take that carry out to use ratio. We make it 11%. Again, really bullish report. This was a good report. We were right in harvest. We were rallying at the same time. I mean, soybeans were starting to go crazy, or were continuing to go crazy, I guess. This was all overall a really good report. I think we went into the December report really interested because that was going to kind of set the tone to come into today. But here's what they did in December. Remember when we looked back at that February and March report of last year and they just punted, they didn't change any of the numbers? It's exactly what they did to us in December. In December, they just totally punt to January. They don't change anything. So that bullish sentiment that we got in November is just kind of continued through today. Global production stays the same. China imports increase a little bit, but overall, I mean, they do not do anything on this December report. And I think that's kind of maintained the bullish sentiment that we have going into today's report. So that bottom line, again, they leave stocks to use ratio the same, prices the same, the whole thing. So we'll look at that, what I just said on, this is a December 2021 corn chart. So we'll kind of watch that story. So this is for 2 new crops away when we were talking last year. This is when we get that really big carryout number. Right here, so that January report was negative, and then they let that negative news fester for a little while. This circle basically encompasses February and March when they do not give us any news. Right there is when they tell us we're going to plant 97 million acres, and you can really see it set the tone negative going forward through the summer. Here's just about when we have those Iowa storms that really got people's attention, got the market's attention, right in the heart of the Corn Belt. All these pictures of grain elevators blown over, on-farm storage blown over, corn crops just laid flat like carpet, got guys' attention, got folks looking at it. And here is where November, when on the supply and demand report, they plug us in with record exports. And that really set the tone right up until where we are today, you can see. So this chart is US corn exports in 2020. So to your far left is China. So if you look at, I'm colorblind, so I think that's orange, right? you can see in 2018-19, like we barely register corn to China. 2019 and 20, again, just barely register corn to China. This year, you know, basically what's that, like 2.35 million metric tons. So this corn to China is really a thing. It'll be interesting to see today how they address this, if they address it. I think there's some real questions. Fund money, we'll talk about. So we can see here on the right, this lighter blue color is their managed long position. When corn gets to $4, the fund guys get long corn. So there's a lot of money in there that's also helping support this. Be interesting to see how that plays out today, if they stay involved. So this brings us back to today's report, and no one in the grain business wants to make a prediction on this report, and that still includes me. I do not want to make a prediction. So what we're going to do is ask some questions about today's report, maybe some things to look for here, okay? Here are some of the estimates coming in today. The average trade estimate for ending stocks on corn is 1.6 billion bushels. There are some ranges of carryouts that are from like 1.8 to 1.2 at the low end. Be interesting to see how bullish they want to be this early. We were at 1.7. We should be below 1.7 at this point. It'd be pretty surprising to see us not. I would think if we get into that 1.2 range, which I don't think is going to happen, that is an awfully bullish report. And it would definitely be a very interesting winner for the corn market if that happens. South American production, down at the bottom, I left that in this time. You know, I think some real questions on South American production. We've been talking for a while about their weather. We've been talking about them being hot and dry, if they're going to have some issues, you know, to see if the USDA addresses it. They don't have to, but to see if they address it today, I think will be interesting. You know, the other thing is just yesterday, right after I put this chart together, Argentina announced that an export sale. So they're going to start loading ships and sending corn out of Argentina again. That's a pretty new development. They also got some rain yesterday. So maybe that thing in South America is kind of curing itself right now while we're talking. I don't know. And like I said, I don't know if the USDA will address that today. So on the corn side of today, it's, do they make cuts to production? You know, I think most guys I talk to, that 175 yield still seems pretty optimistic across the country. You know, are they going to cut that yield? Do they cut harvested acres? You know, harvested acres, I don't know. It feels like they cut out almost 1.6 million for the storms that went through Iowa. You know, I don't know that they need to cut it anymore. We had a really good harvest. We had good weather across the country and made good progress. Most guys were done early. I would be surprised to lose harvested acres now, but who knows? Do they further ramp up exports here? The dollar has remained kind of down. It's got a little bit of strength in the last few weeks, but you know, export business should be good. If South America was out of it and Europe's having some problems and China's still buying, I think you can make a case we could ramp up exports. It's, again, how bullish they want to be this early. What do they do with corn for ethanol use? You know, obviously, since their last report, they haven't given us numbers since November. You know, since November, a lot of people working from home again, a lot of people not going. Holiday travel, maybe busier than we expected, but still far down from a normal year. You know, how are they going to adjust that? You know, can these factors combine to get us to that 1.59 carryout? Can we get below that? You know, that, remember, 1.7 was the largest, or was the smallest number rather, since 2013-14. You know, you go back and look at those 2013-14 prices, you know, we get down in this range, we're talking some pretty good prices for guys. You know, I just touched on how do they treat South American corn production. Some real questions, if they address it, how they address it, you know, how bad do they dock Argentina? Now, all of a sudden, that Argentina shipping stuff, you know, will we see that come to the market at some point? If they punt again here. If they don't answer some of these questions above, how disappointed are we? You know, sometimes we see just the lack of data and we just work lower. Like we just had built in our heads, we expected a bullish report and then we don't get it, or we don't get it bullish enough, which I think is going to be key on soybeans today. And the market's disappointed and works lower. I think if the news is bearish or neutral here, I think there's some real question on, do end users and do funds kind of buy the dip here? Do they get some needs met, or do they get some protection on the fund side? And do they support this from any really rapid price decline here? You know, corn, even if this USDA report today isn't as bullish as we would like to see, clearly this corn crop is way tighter. This carryout is way tighter than we've been the last few years. These guys out there making ethanol, dudes feeding a bunch of animals, or the export business, they need this corn. And if the market really takes a dive today, or, you know, takes a meager dive today, they may step in here and buy just to fill their needs. And that may really help support us from having anything too ugly happen today. I think the questions that I would have and that you would have, and if we pay attention to going forward, they may start to give us a little finger on the pulse of the trend here, is the South America weather conditions. You know, like I've said a few times, some real questions down there, and some, maybe this thing's getting better if they're starting to get rain. I think China demand going forward, China, you know, every time we talk about grain, China demand and is always the question. You know, I think this ethanol and COVID thing, you know, how they're related is a question. Certainly folks are still working from home. You know, I have friends who are being told they're going to work from home no matter what happens now until June 1st. You know, as people are traveling less, if this continues for a long time, it's obviously going to be a drain on that market. And then I think the other big question for both corn and soybeans here is the 2021 corn and soybean acreage battle. You know, I'm certainly talking to guys here who are really paying attention to that, who like growing soybeans. Up here in the thumb, we've had some great yields last year. Some guys who grew just phenomenal soybeans. They can grow them a lot cheaper, really hit a home run on the yield. They can contract them right now for, you know, about $11, a little bit above $11. In what seems to be a really bullish story on that. My phone's ringing. So it'll be interesting to see how that battle plays out going forward. I think that March acreage report will be very, very interesting now. We'll talk about soybeans just really quick. You know, what do they do here today? Do they make a little trim to yield? Some people think that they could make a little trim to yield. How aggressively do they raise exports? I mean, I think they have to raise exports here. That's my opinion. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. But it would seem that they would have to do something with exports. And it's like, how bullish do they want to be? That market is super bullish, has been for a long time now. You know, how do they handle this thing? How do they treat South American production? Same story in corn. I mean, a lot of key areas down there, hot and dry, some weather, some concerns. You know, how do they do that? Are they going to address that here? Do they want to be super bullish at these prices? Or do they kind of want to not do anything? Do they want to punt, maybe let this thing bleed a little bit lower and introduce bullish news when we're $1 or $2 cheaper, because soybeans can move $1 or $2 so quickly? You know, and here, my big question today on soybeans is mildly bullish disappointing? We have had such a run. If we come out with bullish numbers, but only, you know, mild, medium bullish numbers, do we very quickly go, oh, we've been trading numbers bigger than this for 2 months, let's work lower? You know, I worry that we actually see something really positive in soybeans, but it's just not positive enough. And in a report like that, often we can kind of take a pretty hard hit the first day or two and then maybe rebound after that. But I think today could be pretty dicey on soybeans unless we have really good news. Weather, or the going forward, I think the questions here are the same as corn. It's South America weather and conditions. China demand, always China on soybeans. And what is this acreage battle going to look like? You know, what is the USDA going to tell us? What are these prices going to do? I think we'll start seeing some of those questions get answered, hopefully today, but it might take a little longer to get those answered than we'd like. I put this chart in here. You know, this is the stuff that I talk to growers about all the time. I talk to farmers all the time, and all the conversations basically come back to these same areas. And I know you guys probably know everything I'm getting ready to say, and I get it, but sometimes I feel like my job is just to be a catalyst in helping you make choices or make decisions or step out of it and just look at it a little more practically. So these are the things I think are some of the most important points when marketing grain. This first one is just know your cost of reduction on average yields. And I know all of you watching it go, who doesn't know that? And what I would tell you is a lot of people don't know that. There are a lot of guys who like farming, but don't necessarily like the business of farming. They like growing things, they like driving tractors and being outside, and they hate selling grain and hate the pencil pushing part of it. But I think this is really important, knowing that cost of reduction and kind of having a handle on that. The big thing I would say, like particularly I think right now on soybeans is a really good example. And when markets are rallying, you've got to ask yourself and be honest about it. Am I being patient because I know the market, or am I being greedy here? You know, old crop soybeans today, you know, pushing 13 bucks or above 13 bucks. My screen is off here, so I can't see. Hanging on, I think is great, but I've talked to some guys, they don't have any old crop done. That's crazy. You know, it's at that point, are you being patient or being greedy? You can sell a bunch at 12 or 13 bucks and put a bunch of money in your pocket and gamble with the rest. But at some point, I think the gambling or letting it ride is a lot. You know, and be smart enough when you have some money in your, you know, to take it and put it in your pocket and get to farm again next year. The one thing I like pointing out to guys is when something rallies, generally the new crop contracts are going to rally along with it. So if we see a big report today on March 2020 beans and we're up heavy, there's a really good chance that November 20 and November 21 beans are up. You know, I would always be watching new crop. You'd be surprised how many folks I talk to that can only focus on the crop they're growing or just grew, and they can't really think about two new crops, or, you know, always be looking ahead as far as you can. Pay attention to 2 years away. We already have guys doing some hedge to arrives and specialty contracts for a lot of 2022 wheat already, definitely some 2022 soybeans getting guys' attention. So there's some numbers out there that are starting to make sense. And whoever you do sell your grain to, or if you hedge it yourself, you know, those are things that I think to start looking at this point, especially if we continue to see a really big rally. I would start thinking about taking as much risk off the table years out as you can. You know, in 2012, I remember in, you know, March or May, contracting corn for guys that was $5 and $5.50. And I would talk to folks who would just be tickled. They'd say, I've never sold corn for $5.50. For $5.50, I'm so excited. And then it was $6.50 at harvest, $7 at harvest. And these same guys would go, man, I got screwed on this $5 corn contract. Like I totally missed the mark of this $5. And I go, no, you were so excited. Like it's, you know, don't take risk off the table. If you know your price cost of production and you can take risk off the table at that cost of production or above, you know, take that risk off the table. One of the things I would say is when market fundamentals seem bearish and the market remains bullish, it's probably time to make a sale. I say all the time here, when the market doesn't make sense, but the price still is really attractive, time to make a sale. We see that wheat every couple of years. Like wheat will just rally. It'll be, you know, 640 futures. And then the story seems really completely negative all the way around. That's the time to sell, because eventually that negative stuff is going to come to the market and going to get us. Don't try to hit home runs. This is kind of back to the guys with all the $13 soybeans. They're hanging on because they think they're going to be 15. I hope they get to 15 too. I hope those guys are right. I really do. But why try to hit a home run at the $15 beans when I can just put some money in my pocket here with some $13? And then I would say make lots of sales. You know, I see guys who try to make one good sale a year, and sometimes that good sale ends up a bad one. But if they make a ton of sales, they're going to have some good ones, going to have some bad ones, and hopefully just have a better average when it all pans out. These are some charts that we get from StoneX, which is FC Stone. They just changed their name in the last year or so. These are some pretty interesting charts that we get every week or two that I find really valuable. This is the Chicago Board of Trade corn price percentages as of last Friday. So if we look, this is all the percentage breakdowns. Corn is in the top 10% of prices recorded in the last 5 years, and it is pinned right to the top. I think this comes back to that, am I being patient or am I being greedy? In the last 5 years, we have not had a better opportunity to sell corn than we have right now. And I'm definitely not saying get out there and sell all of this corn. It's not what I'm saying at all. But a chart like this tells me that I probably should be getting some risk off the table here. Same chart for soybeans. Chicago Board of Trade the last 5 years. You know, when we looked at that 25-year chart at the beginning, and we could kind of see it, you know, it's been a long time since we've had prices above this, a breakout like this on soybeans. And this thing has gone on since, you know, if we go back to where that line begins to go up, June sometime, it's almost absolutely vertical since then. So, you know, definitely worth paying attention to. This really makes it real visible where things are and what's going on. I threw a wheat one in here. Wheat manages to spend a lot more time in that upper 30%, upper 10%, but wheat still right now, the absolute best prices we've seen in the last 5 years in Chicago. You know, I tell guys all the time, I mean, wheat always, it seems like always gives us a chance to lock in better than $6 futures. Sometimes it's 3 months before harvest. Sometimes it's 18 months before harvest, but be paying attention. We always get a chance to do it. The market hardly ever fails us on that in the last few years. Questions? Does anybody have any questions? Let me look. Jim said he would text me if I had any, but I've just been talking. Let's see. No.
Lou, while we have you, is Caleb available right now?
Yeah, Caleb is available right now. So
why don't we go to Caleb and let some of our people come up with some questions? And I know you've got the answers, and I've got a couple questions too. But before we get to that, Caleb Sundblad, good morning. How are you?
Can you hear?
Yep. All
Yeah,
set.
Caleb,
Okay, very good. Yeah,
Caleb,
sorry.
good morning.
Apologize there. My audio's been messing up here, Terry. But no, I appreciate Lou inviting me to sort of share a few ideas this morning, and hopefully there's some folks out there who we can help, you know, give a little insight to the dry bean market as well. So I just wanted to share a few additional things and kind of give a quick update on where we stand today. So here's a quick rundown of what we saw in 2020 here in Michigan. And this is primarily focused on black beans. You know, obviously there's probably some navy growers or some small red growers out there, but I wanted to keep it kind of focused on black beans. That's the principal crop here now in Michigan for our dry bean growers. So we increased acres last year. You know, we really saw, you know, the demand for more acres of dry beans really peak last March when you saw old crop dry bean prices dramatically rise post COVID or post the beginning of COVID. And it really influenced new crop dry bean prices to rise as well. And it really become much more competitive against soybean prices and pushed a lot of those acres. And we saw a lot of acres actually, especially here in Michigan, added from what I'd call the fringe growing areas, the fringe growers, guys who normally aren't dry bean producers, black bean producers specifically, that came into the market. So we saw a pretty big increase in the amount of acres last year from 2019 up 23,000 acres. So it was quite a big jump. Good spring weather. You know, we really turned the page from 2019 and 2020, and we're able to get everything seeded on time. So I did see somebody, thank you, Jim, asked where I was from. So I should have started with that. Lou, I apologize. I didn't know if you had done the introduction, but it's okay. So I'm with Co-op Elevator, actually work right across from Lou. Lou and I, for a number of years, worked together on the grain side of the business. And then recently I transitioned over to the dry bean side, and just this past September, took over as a manager of our marketing division here of dry bean and specialty crops with Co-op Elevator. So getting back here real quick, again, Michigan production this year, quite a bit better. Obviously, we planted more acres, number one, as I discussed, but we also had better planting conditions. We had good August rains. We did have some of those drought conditions in late June, mid-July. Beans sat dormant for a number of weeks. I think there was definitely some concern at that point about how the crop was going to shape up. But then as we moved forward, we had a lot better production, good rains in August, and real good production last year. Overall as well, not only was production up, but quality was very good. Harvest sort of had a little two-way. We had an early harvest and a later harvest, I'd say, but both happened without issues. So that was a little recap on Michigan. I don't know, Lou, if you can keep moving the slides forward for me so I have a little script to read off of. In Minnesota, North Dakota, the other principal bean growing region here in the country, a little bit of a different story. We saw acres relatively stable. The big thing was we saw a lot of pinto acres out there, but we did not see as big of an increase on the black bean side. It was relatively stable, 2020 versus 19. Their big challenge, and Lou, I think you probably hit on this when you discussed last year, the 2019 corn crop, was that there was a really, really poor fall in 2019, which pushed a lot of the crop harvest time actually into March and April of 2020. So we saw a lot of fields that were planted into really suboptimal conditions this year. Also had a lot more difficulty with weather in the summer, had severe storms. They had one rain event in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which is sort of the heart of that bean growing territory, right along the Red River Valley there, 10 inches in 24 hours. So, they had a real, especially in that area, 20 miles east or west, a real drown out. You had drown out acres, you had poor planting conditions, and then you had early killing frost. So the second week of September, I think it was around the 9th, 10th of September, you have 3 nights in a row where, we have temperatures below 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit, and really had a prolonged period of killing frost. So I think the estimate right now is that we probably lost roughly 10 to 15% of what was planted out there, or at least what was projected to be harvested. So we saw their production go up, but certainly was not as strong as some might anticipate. This was released right before. This was released early September from DW Sturt, who does a lot of the bean projections. There's no real good USDA numbers to get a balance sheet like in corn. But we were looking for, again, you see the real low ending stocks in 2019. Poor production year, first of all, with a lot of issues out west. But then you had the COVID big demand increase as well. So you can see the demand increase from 18 to 19, almost 1 million hundredweights of black beans. So a big push in demand. Going forward into 2020, the early numbers were looking for about 1.6 million hundredweight carryout, which is historically pretty high. Really now, I think we're seeing that number probably going to come down to sub 1 million hundredweights, probably somewhere in that 700, 800,000. The reason for that, again, this is a chart of the black bean consumption per capita. This was done by the USDA ERS. This was a projection that was done in summer of 2019. Now you see, we actually think that the 1920 consumption was much higher. You can kind of see they projected it around 1.2 pounds per person in the US. We think that really with COVID and the demand for shelf-stable foods like black beans, really picking up. We think it actually went to 1.25 to 1.3, but you can see the general trend of this chart. If you're a black bean grower that's involved today, and especially those of us in the business, this makes us excited, right? You can see the general trend is for us, the consumption of black beans here in the US is growing exponentially. I'm going to kind of get close to wrapping it up here. The other thing I wanted to touch on, not only did we increase domestic consumption, but exports were up heavily as well. This did not include the August number for last year, but you can see that we increased quite a bit. These numbers are in 100 or 1,000 pounds. So, you know, we were up went from 1 million, a little over 1 million hundredweights exported in 2019 or 18-19 to about 1.5 million. And probably when the August numbers got added into this, probably pushing about 1.7 million. So black bean exports from the US up substantially last year. A lot of countries stepped in, had government buying programs in response to COVID. Again, beans are a real key shelf staple food, especially in a lot of these countries in Latin America who, you know, already had some economic woes that were hit hard by this. Beans were a real cheap protein source to turn to. So overall, a big bounce back, I'd say, in 2020 for the bean market. You know, we had, I think, a good production year on black beans, especially in Michigan, but demand really outpaced, you know, our ability to produce more. You know, going forward, we think exports are going to continue to be up. Domestic consumption, especially through the last half of 2020, and the first half of 21, really, really strong. We see probably historically high prices here. I think we're still trying to sort out where things will end up, but I think prices, especially in response to the soybean price surge here, have really come up. And again, now we have a new president going to be taking over here soon. That's going to change a lot of the things. You know, in the bean market, we rely a lot on exports, as I mentioned. So a lot of the trade policies, how the US dollar behaves, how other federal governments respond to COVID, those things are really consequential to what's going to happen. But I think overall, again, I would say in general is a bounce back year for us, and especially in the black bean market. I think that's all I have there, Lou.
Just real quick, Caleb, I noticed there was a question posted here just a couple of minutes ago. The question was, is our 2021 dry bean prices expected to follow the price rally in soybeans? And if not, will there be a significant shift in acres out of dry beans into soybeans?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, Terry. I think, yes, I think we've already seen that. I think some of the early pricing that came out has been, you know, we're already eclipsing, I think, last year's pricing for early contracts here. You know, it's still early, it's still January. You know, typically really guys are getting heated up to make decisions in February, March, but a lot of that's happening earlier this year because of that price rally. So I think it is going to follow, but I think at some point there's going to be a limit there. Again, you know, Chicago Board of Trade can change pretty quickly because we don't have something like that to fall back on. In the dry bean world, it happens a little more gradually. So I think if these prices, you know, with the report today that Lou was talking about, if those prices take off another $1 or $2 and really make it a lot more attractive to plant soybeans, you will see acreage changes. And I think you already will. Again, I think we were historically high in acres last year in dry beans. And I think a lot of the fringe, we'll call them fringe growers that got into the market again or got in for the first time because the price of soybeans versus dry beans didn't make any sense, you're going to see those acres leave. So I do think there'll be some changes.
Lou, back to you just for a quick moment. Quickly, you can go back in your slides, but you had a slide there, Lou, that indicated the corn prices over the past 10 years or so. And on that chart, it showed 2011 and 2012, if I recall.
Yep.
Where we saw the corn price up quite a bit. And I guess my initial question is I don't recall on that chart what months we saw those prices up as high as what they were. And I guess compared to where our prices are right now, we'd have quite a ways to go yet before we got to those levels. And I think, wasn't 2012 and 11, wasn't that we had some extreme drought going on in the major growing areas?
Yeah, so when we look at this, like I said, that big spike just to the right of the center, that's basically when ethanol industry comes online. Then that second big spike that lasts for about 35 months there is the weather of 2011 and 12. In 2012, we had just that unprecedented drought. The 2011 carryout was a lot tighter than even where we are now. And then when we came into that big drought, it really helped propel things higher and leave them there. But, I think, and maybe I didn't say this, to get us above these levels, that's what it's taken. To get us above where we are now at about $5 futures, it has taken an entire industry being invented, the ethanol industry basically becoming a thing in 2007, 2008, and then maybe once in a lifetime weather then in 2011, 12, and 13. So that's the kind of story that we need to see here. Everybody wants to keep taking us higher. There's certainly different stories that could, if we become the primary corn supplier to China, maybe it can help propel us to those levels. But to get us above where we are today, it has taken two extreme stories to get us higher than this.
Jim, any questions for Lou?
So I do have a couple. Looking forward to 21-22, could you summarize some key market forces or indicators that will put pressure on this market?
Yeah, I think kind of some of the stuff we talked about, if we look ahead, what acres are going to be this year is super interesting. If guys plant, one of the questions I guess I would have for growers who are listening, are you guys sticking with rotation? Are you guys considering planting more corn or less corn at these prices, or more soybeans? I know Caleb doesn't want to hear it, but I've talked to a bunch of guys who say, I'm not going to mess with dry beans if I can grow $11 and $12 soybeans this year. So I still think there may be some acreage story in the air that could play out. I think this China thing is crazy. We looked at that chart that showed the last 2 seasons, we've basically exported 0 to China. It barely is a blip, and now it's a whole bunch of corn. China has had some production problems in kind of their corn belt. Maybe there's an opportunity there for us that continues. So China's always a driving force. And the other one is just the ultimate wild card in farming. For you and for the markets is what's going to happen with this weather. Here we are with a pretty mild winter. Does this mild winter indicate a mild spring and we get to the field and get planting early and in good conditions? Or all this decent weather all the way through Christmas, do we end up just paying for really bad in March and April? And certainly a dramatic weather like 2012 can change. But, for me, I think the big things going forward it's China. We're feed and ethanol, I think, is probably pretty tapped out. There's not going to be a ton more going to, those aren't going to shift dramatically. Exports, I think, still can shift dramatically. And I think without getting, I don't want to get too much into politics here, but, a new presidential administration, I think, could be interesting for the ethanol industry. I think they'll be friendlier for maybe electric vehicles and maybe stuff like that. Ethanol is not going away. Gasoline's not going away. But I think there'll be some questions long term on what those things look like as we try to turn to a more, green electric infrastructure for vehicles.
So Lou, one additional question to follow up would be on the China. What is the trade's feeling whether or not China will actually take delivery of those buys that they've had? We've seen them in the past renege on some of those purchases. What's the trade's thought or views on them totally committing to taking those deliveries?
Yeah. That's a real problem. I think with China, they can say they're going to buy stuff and then they cancel it. There doesn't seem to be a lot of penalty from that, which somebody probably way smarter than me understands why there's not a penalty on that. I think ultimately they're the biggest customer. So when your biggest customer comes and goes, you just do business with them when they come back. You know, right now it certainly seems, I mean, soybean, we know they need it. So when they cancel it and go to South America, that's one thing, but because South America is just the soybean producer, but we are the corn producer. If China needs to continue to buy corn, they really don't have any place else to buy it from right now except for us. I know several years ago, they kind of made a decision that they would be this was their goal, was they would be self-sufficient on corn, and they would have to get soybeans from North and South America, primarily from South America. You know, if they lose that idea of corn independence, they're just going to continue to have to come here. But I guess we'll wait and see, you know, and why we don't have bigger penalties on them for them. You know, I mean, they will cancel soybean shipments, drop the price 75 cents, and then rebuy soybeans and ship those ones. Why there's not a bigger penalty to that, I do not understand.
So obviously, you know, trade, when we look at all of these market projections and the fact that ethanol was down, it stands to reason that it is supply and the export markets that we've really got to pay attention to for our demand drivers as we move forward into that the rest of 2021 and 22.
Yeah, I think you hit it. I mean, it's exports and then what they're going to do with this demand are the two big drivers. Certainly, I think, and see if, Jim, you agree with me, you know, I think the ethanol could be a really interesting story in the second half of this year. You know, if we get these vaccinations out and people go, I mean, everybody I know wants to take a road trip, wants to drive somewhere, wants to, you know, travel across the country, you know, so hopefully if we can see this situation get under control, we'll see a really strong bounce back on demand, and we'll really change that ethanol number pretty quickly. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jim?
Well, we're hopeful, you know, but some of the, I guess, data I pulled like yesterday, it's going to be hard pressed for us to get up to our pre-COVID numbers. I think at this point, just because we've seen such an annihilation of our economy that we got so many more people out of work. When before we went in, we had everybody basically at full employment, so they felt comfortable in being able to take those trips. But with the fact that our workforce is going to be down, there's going to be less discretionary income coming in. I believe that we're going to be hard pressed to get up to those levels. It will take 2 or 3 years if we ever get up to those levels again.
I don't see any more questions, guys. So at this stage of the game, Jim, any final thoughts with Lou?
So Lou, I think you did a very good job of setting us up for our growers to understand, you know, what goes into some of this data and this analysis that our government provides us with these reports. You know, again, as I say, you know, exports I think are going to be extremely critical for this coming year, probably the next 2 years, if not 3, just because of my previous statement of where I think the ethanol supply demand is going to be. So that does set us up for next week. Please, I know Terry's going to recap on this as well, but I want to definitely let everybody know that next week we're actually going to be talking about the export markets. And so to know more about those markets and to understand the foundation for these prices and where we're at, please make sure that you're here next week to hear what the people that are in the trenches every day about what's happening on our export market. So again, Lou, you and Caleb, I want to thank you for your time this morning and helping this presentation. And with that, Terry, I'll turn it back to you.
Very good. And yes, I reiterate the thank you to both you, Lou and Caleb. Very interesting. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us here on Coffee with Corn.